Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm talking with Tomáš Herceg. He's the CEO of Riganti and the recent author of Modernizing .NET Web Applications. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for hanging out. This is fantastic. So Modernizing .NET Web Applications just came out from A-Press. It's like 600 pages. You've kind of dropped the holiday book of the season here with a complete roadmap for basically anyone who wants to modernize their .NET Web applications. It looks like a huge amount of work. How long have you been working on this book?
I tracked all time I spent on that, and I was surprised. It was less than I thought. It was about 500 hours. Maybe not all the time is included, but I guess I tracked at least 90% of it. So
that's a huge amount of effort, though. But
Yeah.
you've also been a dev for over 15 years. You've been a Microsoft MVP. You're the CEO of a software development company in Prague. So there's the 500 hours of writing, but then there's also thousands and thousands of hours of actual experience. I assume your company does this kind of work.
Yeah, exactly. That was basically what led me to writing this book, because we had a lot of modernization projects for banks and financial institutions. They had a lot of very old web forms apps, sometimes even running on .NET Framework 1. So I saw this experience aggregated across several projects, and I thought I saw a lot of people were quite confused. What are the equivalents of these old frameworks and technologies? What strategies they should select when migrating? And also, and that's one special chapter in the book, it's about how to explain the need of modernization to business people, to management, because it's a technical decision, what you need to do, what you need to change to modernize the application, but also other people in the company, they need to understand why it's necessary and what are the risks if you don't do it.
Okay, so let's talk about that. And I'm going to use my blog and my sites as an example, because we're going to pretend that I'm a little company. Hanselman.com is one person. My blog has been .NET Web Forms and ASP.NET 2 for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
It works fine. Why should I, as a business person, bother modernizing if it works fine today?
Yeah, so it depends on multiple factors. One is if the application is still developed or still extended with new features, and if there is some active development going on, then the benefit is much higher, because everybody will get more efficient. There's a lot of security concerns. .NET Framework is still supported. That's not a problem. But a lot of tiny improvements in terms of security, like better algorithms for hashing passwords, better management of secrets, for example, in the code base. There's dozens of these tiny improvements that when you add everything together, they can make a huge difference. And with new regulations like GDPR or things like that, it will be quite difficult to pass these new requirements with very old applications, for example.
Yeah, I think that's a really great example. And I also wanted to support mobile. I wanted to make the web app progressive, have it be faster. I think the expectation of the speed of an application is greater in 2025 than it was in 2002 when I launched the blog. And if the blog loaded in a couple of seconds before, that was fine. But now I need this blog to load in, sub half second or even a tenth of a second. So for me, upgrading to .NET Core was a performance benefit that was, it was probably 10 or 20x.
Yeah, it can be performance benefit. If your blog site takes a few seconds to load, it's a killer for search engines, because they will give it much worse ratings and they will not recommend this site. Also, it can affect the costs, like the websites in Azure on Linux, they are cheaper than the Windows. So if you will be able to run the application on Linux, it can make a difference even for a small blog site, for example. And also in bigger projects where you have larger development teams, it's it's like increasingly difficult to hire new team members in these legacy projects, because people who started working with .NET 8 years ago, they may not even met the .NET framework. They already started in .NET Core and they didn't met the old world. So it will be, over time, it will be increasingly difficult to find people with the necessary skills. And of course, everyone wants to stay updated with the new versions, because otherwise your value on the market also decreases if you know only 20 years old stuff. So that's also an argument which the management of the company would probably understand, that it will be difficult to hire another people to the project.
Yeah, totally agree. I want to pull back on the conversation you just said about the cost, which is huge for me. So I'm paying for my own Azure time. And I always say, if you talk to a Microsoft employee and they're running around on free Azure time, don't trust them, because they're not going to architect their application in an efficient way, because for them, the time is free. I was running this thing on a virtual machine, on a Windows virtual machine on IIS. It's very heavy, very expensive. For me, moving to .NET Core, now .NET 6, 7, 8, 9, was a choice. It was about choice. I wanted Linux. I wanted Docker. I could do Windows. I want to have that option. So as soon as I could run it anywhere, as soon as I could run my blog on a Raspberry Pi, it gave me a sense of like, okay, now where do I want to host? Do I want to go to a tiny container on Linode? Do I want to run it on Heroku? And I ended up switching to a tiny, I think I'm on a P1 application server on Azure. It went down by like $40 a month. And it's so fast. It's so fast.
Yeah. And there is a lot of case studies from bigger teams, like from the Bing team, how much they saved when migrating to .NET 6 and then to even newer versions. Like there are really huge amounts of money that can be saved just by like using more performant new version of .NET. And I love actually the longest chapter of the book is a chapter describing all the benefits and all the features of the new .NET, what you will gain if you modernize. And like I'm referencing the Stephen Taub's blog posts, these very long blog posts with thousands of performance improvements that get in every version of .NET. This is really amazing stuff, amazing platform improvements that we can enjoy.
So what are reasons that people feel like they can't modernize? Like they look at their code base and they go, oh, our code base uses this. We can't do it. For example, I was on a thing called DOS Blog, DAS Blog, that is now managed by Mark Downey. And we had used the registry. We had backslashes and hard-coded paths for the C drive. And we had one or two COM objects. And that made us feel like we could never move. But the really big one was we used web forms. So we were just convinced that web forms was going to prevent us from ever moving forward.
I think that it depends. I guess every team has a bit different concerns. I think that it depends a lot on code quality and testability of the applications, because if you have thousands of tests, then you are less scared to make even bigger changes to the application. You are not scared that you will break something, or at least you will not break something important. You can make some trivial breaking changes, but the overall impact will not be that big. Other teams, they can be scared of that a lot of legacy projects, they contain functionality no one knows anything about that. So you basically have to go through every line of code, try to understand what was the intent, what is doing, why it's there, if it can be removed or not. And even trivial changes, one-liners, can be very risky because you don't see everything. Usually on these projects, it's not the person who was at the beginning of the project. It can be third, fourth generation of people working on that. And if there is documentation, it can be outdated. So I was in some projects, we were actually using ChatGPT to figure out what was the original intent of the code, what it's doing, and to map the business logic to like discover the use cases that were probably implemented in the application. So it helped us. Of course, it needed manual review. We couldn't rely on that, but it was very helpful in discovering what the application used to do because nobody knew.
Yeah, I really like that you called out testability because on the DOS blog side, that's what saved us. We had a very extensive unit testing section for our runtime. So we didn't have that fear. And I talk about fear-based development a lot on the show. If you are afraid of your code base, write more tests until you're no longer afraid. And having a great testable framework allows you to do crazy stuff. Like you could just switch from .NET 6 to 8 without even worrying about it, and then run the test and see how you feel. And if you feel not fearful, go for it. But if you have no tests, you're really just rolling the dice.
Yeah, and I think that a similar fear is when you're writing your first test, because there is a lot of work, a lot of complexity in preparing the infrastructure, mocking all the services you will need. So the first test is really difficult to do. So a lot of people are scared of that, and they will not do it. But once you have at least one test, then writing any additional test, it's much easier. And with tools like Copilot today, it's very useful. Of course, it doesn't work 100% reliable, but still it can save you a lot of time. So.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And the other thing that can save you a lot of time are frameworks from people like yourself who've thought about these things. So, for example, you work on .vvm, which is a tool that lets you literally modernize your web forms app. So if you're listening and you have a web forms app and you think you'll never be able to go forward, .vvm is a tool that allows you to modernize those forms. You can basically switch your ASPX forms to a different, view model equivalent that will feel familiar but is totally compatible with .NET 8. Do you use this a lot in your business?
Yeah, it's basically, this is .vvm is what started our focus on modernization. We started this framework in 2014, and because previously we were using web forms, but in 2014 it was clear that the web is going in a different direction than web forms. So we were looking on React or Angular, and we saw Knockout.js, which was a client-side MVVM framework. And we liked that idea, but we didn't like writing a lot of JavaScript code. So .vvm basically allows you to build rich client applications with just C# and HTML. We declare the view model in C# and .vvm somehow translates it in JavaScript. So it was generating the Knockout.js code for us. And if this idea sounds familiar to you, it's because of Blazor, which came a few years after that. We started before .NET Core, so first version of .vvm was .NET Framework only, and when .NET Core first version came out, we added support to .NET Core. So suddenly we had a framework which is the same on .NET Framework and .NET Core. Yeah, so you just install one NuGet package in your application, and the syntax, everything is the same. And this wasn't the original intent, but like accidentally we created a modernization path for web forms projects, because you can start with your .NET Framework applications, which may have hundreds of web forms pages, and you can install .vvm in this project. So it's running in the same application, in the same process as the web forms. And then you can incrementally replace the pages one by one, rewrite them to .vvm. It will force you to refactor your code behind files to view models, which makes it testable. So then you can cover it with tests. And then once you get rid of all web forms dependencies, you will be able just to switch the target framework to .NET 8, .NET 9, anything, the newest version, and it will work because the .vvm is the same on both these platforms. So it's we are not using it for all modernization projects, but when you just need to change the target framework and don't make any significant changes in the application, you want to keep the things as they are, just target newer libraries, then this can save you a lot of things, because all the business logic, you don't need to touch it. You just need to refactor the code behind to view model, which is basically one-to-one transformation. And most of the code base can remain as it is.
Yeah. Now, I didn't personally use .vvm on DOSBlog because we were already using a similar templating engine. But I think your point about if you already have view models, if you're producing view models, you're halfway there. It's just that markup that's the challenge. And you've got .vvm has a thing called .html markup. We switched to Razor Pages, and we found that moving over to Razor Pages was surprisingly possible. Even for complicated pages. And now today, as of last week, all my websites are on .NET 8. They're all running Razor Pages, and I've got no web forms anywhere. And users of DOSBlog, Mark Downey has gone and updated it all to .NET 8 and .NET 9, and the benefits are immense. It felt impossible, and now I'm on the other side of it, and I'm like, why didn't I do this a year ago? Like, I feel like I should have started before.
Yeah, like congratulations to achieve this. Even for smaller projects, there is quite a lot of steps you need to take. It's not just like clicking a few things in Visual Studio and that's done. Also, you need to test everything, that you didn't break things like that. But for longer projects, it can take months or even like 1-2 years. But the book describes how to do it incrementally, so you would minimize the risk in each stage of this process. And you need to figure how to be able to do both modernization and like adding new features to the application, because that's what the business usually requires. Not many companies will let you like, okay, we will stop adding any feature for 2 years. Let's modernize. And then, that's not how the world works.
Yeah. One of the other things that I thought was really cool about the book, and I think it's worth checking out, and again, folks can see this at modernizationbook.com, is it's not just about upgrading from web forms to .NET. It's about, I'm on WCF. I'm on the Windows Communication Foundation, which ran a huge amount of the business in the world for a very long period of time and then slowly faded away. Or upgrading from forms authentication to identity, or upgrading from, SignalR to SignalR Core. These are, a lot of people are out there right now, for example, using WCF, sitting on WCF thinking, I guess that's it. We're here. We're stuck. And they're just not stuck. There are options. And you call out some of those options in the book.
Yeah, I tried to go through all libraries and frameworks that were commonly used. So if you have the alt web services, or if you are using Link to SQL, there is a migration guide, what changes you need to expect and what should be the places where you should put the most attention, because like Entity Framework Core has lazy loading disabled by default. So even if the syntax of Link to SQL and Entity Framework Core is not that different, then you will see runtime errors whenever you try to use the lazy loading. So there's a lot of things like that. I try to cover really everything, because I have seen a lot of legacy projects which contained very rich combinations of all these technologies, alt, ASP.NET Web API, and things like that.
Yeah, there's tools also like Core WCF, which is an open source, version of WCF. You also call out that you could do a direct move, like from WCF to Core WCF, or you could upgrade to gRPC or REST, or things that didn't exist 20 years ago at the time. So you can move sideways, or you can move diagonally, to use that analogy.
Yeah, basically, it's only how much time you have to invest in getting rid of this technical debt that accumulated in the project in the past years. And I tried core WCF on several occasions, and it was really smooth. Like most of the WCF is written in managed code, so probably the migration wasn't that complicated. And I have a similar experience with WPF. That was also 99% of the code base was written in managed code. So like the problem was only the surface where it interacted with IIS or the operation system. So that was the things that had to be changed. And also core WCF, it has quite nice integration with the new authentication model in ASP.NET Core. So that's what I really liked, because it was, and the framework is adding new features which weren't present on WCF. So it's not just like the one-to-one, it's giving you more options. That's really incredible.
Yeah, and the number of options that are available to us now, once you get onto .NET Core, .NET Core, 5 and above, the choices that you have are amazing. Like just being able to say, I'm going to put this in a Docker container, and that's not hard. Like that's a thing you can do very, very quickly. You talk about how modernization takes months. That can be true, but getting it into a container or switching you're putting Nginx in front of it or switching web servers, it's so easy now. Being able to move to a different cloud or to a different deployment model once you get yourself onto a modern .NET stack.
Yeah, exactly. And the great thing is that you can do it incrementally. So several chapters are describing how to use YARP to, like, you can take just small pieces of the application, retarget them or like refactor them to run in the new framework, and use YARP to send all the traffic that isn't handled by the part that is already migrated to the old app. So you can have the container, you can start using the benefits of .NET Core quite early, not after you modernize everything. You can get the benefits very quickly for some parts of the application.
Some people may not be familiar with that. The word you're saying is YARP, yet another reverse proxy. Yeah. And that was created because Microsoft found a bunch of internal teams that were making reverse proxies for all of their stuff and said, hey, let's do this. Let's do it right. Let's do it once, just like Kestrel. Let's make this incredibly fast where performance is a feature, and even supporting things like HTTP2. And then building on that modern infrastructure, it is incredibly performant. And you shouldn't be writing your own reverse proxy if you're trying to do business. You should be able to pick one up off the shelf, and that's what YARP is for.
Yeah, and if you try to make your own reverse proxy, I think that it will not be that fast as YARP is, because YARP is very heavily optimized to not do any unnecessary allocations or anything like that. It's very efficient.
Speaking of that, you mentioned Stephen Tobe. He and I have been doing a series called Deep.NET that you can find on the .NET YouTube. And one of the things that he was commenting about is things like span of T and improving memory allocations. They're making tiny, less than a millisecond changes deep in the core of .NET, and we are just seeing those improvements. I was trying to understand when we see one of his performance posts and he says, this is 10 times faster. And I think to myself, did we suck 10 times worse before? And he's like, no, don't think about it like that. He says, we shaved 10 milliseconds off of this, and it's way, way, way down in the stack. And you're calling it a million times up here, and that adds up. And it's not that we sucked. It's that a new technique for memory allocation was discovered. We implemented it at the core of the framework, and everything just gets better. And that's amazing to me. And I'm sure you see that when you modernize your applications.
Yeah. And I love that from multiple perspectives. One is this, like, every improvement in this base class library, like making the collections, dictionaries, strings faster, that adds up. The effect is very, very huge, because you are using millions of strings in your application. So even if the string gets 1% faster, that if you add this up, it's a great improvement. And also, like, things like rewriting how regular expressions were done internally. It's a big feature that get recently in .NET, and I love that even these old things are still like improving, because like the performance impact is it's like interesting for adds a lot of value.
Yeah, it adds a huge amount of value, and it cannot be overstated how much faster these things are. Like, we're just two guys on a podcast talking about it's so much faster, and I'm sure people are listening, going, "Really? Is it that much faster?" For my little sites, which are kind of complicated, but they're not giant business sites, it feels faster. Some of my applications are milliseconds. I've got incredibly fast, and I 100% believe it's because I upgraded to .NET 8. Even just going from 6 to 8 was a visibly faster upgrade.
Yeah, and the internet is full of charts when you upgrade from .NET 8 to .NET 9, and the graphs of memory consumption, and there is the huge drop because .NET 9 allocates quite significantly less memory for the same application, for the same code. So that's impressive. And also there is a lot of improvements in like how I like work with the new .NET because of the new features, like things like user secrets or things like unified interfaces for logging, for dependency injection. In .NET Framework, I had to use external libraries for dependency injection. Every library used different logging libraries. So I had Log4net, Serilog, and 3 other logging libraries in the same project just because everybody was using different dependencies. Now everything is unified. There are very nice abstraction interfaces for logging, so every library can implement them, and it's very nice to use, very comfortable, and it removes a lot of complexity from the applications.
That's a really great example, and something I think people don't talk about enough is that something like open telemetry could be available to you. When we were doing logging on large distributed systems with .NET Framework, it was still text files. We were trying to come up with centralized places to put these text files. All of those logging frameworks, debug.log, trace.writeline, can be sent in through something like .NET Aspire. So you could use Aspire as a step in modernizing your application, and then you get OpenTelemetry for free. Your app, your former web app that ran in a VM now is a cloud native app with OpenTelemetry, and you're going to be able to see and manage that app in a way that was not even conceivable 20 years ago.
And it's great you mentioned Aspire. It's one of my favorite tools recently. I'm using it in all my projects. Even if it's a very simple application, it also saves a lot of time.
Really? So that may be the next thing for me to do. And I know we only have a couple more minutes here, but let me ask you this. You said you're using Aspire for even your small applications. I have not Aspire-ified my little web apps. Should I? Like, are the benefits going to outweigh any kind of frustration I might have?
I like, for example, it can provision the database for you as a container, so the application suddenly doesn't rely on like having a SQL Server installed on the correct connection string, because I'm using multiple machines. I have computer in the office, then computer at home, and it's difficult to synchronize multiple environments to have same settings everywhere. So when with Aspire, I just clone the repo, run F5, and everything works. So, and it takes just few minutes to set up. It's not very complicated. So I definitely recommend, even for a single app, single database projects, the startup file of the Aspire app, it will have like 3 lines of code, but still the benefit is great. Whenever you set up a new machine, you will be saving a lot of time.
See, now you've left me with homework at the end of our podcast here. I think you're right. I think I need to Aspire my own sites and see what happens, because you're right. It's going to make setup easier. It's going to make local development easier. And I think just the open telemetry would be such an attractive thing. And it's going to take my application to the next level.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Thanks for having me. It was very pleasant.
All right. We've been chatting with Tomáš Herceg, the CEO of Riganti. I've got 3 links for you. We'll put in the show notes. Check out modernizationbook.com to learn all about the new book on modernizing your .NET web applications. If you want to work with Tomáš, then you can go to riganti.cz or CZ And then check out DotVVM, that modernization framework for taking your applications into the future. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.